I bought the last $1 lottery ticket at a regular grocery store. I had never won before, but when I checked the numbers, I had won $33 million. When I arrived to claim my prize, the manager said 3 words. "Good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled." My name is Diane Mitchell. I was 47 years old and I lived a life that most people would call ordinary, which is a polite way of saying small. I worked 5 days a week as a cashier at a Kroger supermarket in Lakewood, Ohio, a suburb that sits just west of Cleveland like an afterthought. I made $14.75 an hour. I drove a 2010 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror I kept meaning to replace. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on Elm Crest Drive, the house I had shared with my husband Tom until he died of a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, in the spring of 2018. Tom's death hollowed me out in ways I still can't fully describe. We weren't wealthy, we weren't glamorous, but we were steady. And steady was everything I had ever wanted. After he was gone, I learned to manage. I clipped coupons. I packed my lunch every morning. I stopped buying coffee at drive-thrus and started making it at home. I switched to the generic brand of everything, one product at a time, until the whole grocery cart was a monument to quiet sacrifice. My daughter Emma, 24 years old, living up in Columbus with her boyfriend Marcus, called me every Sunday evening. That was my week. 5 days of beeping groceries across a scanner, 1 day of laundry, and 1 phone call that reminded me I still existed to someone. Tom's brother Greg was a different story. Gregory Mitchell was 51, 4 years older than Tom would have been, and he had always orbited around our family with the quiet resentment of a man who believed life owed him something it had never delivered. He worked intermittently as a contractor, had a temper he kept loosely leashed in polite company, and was married to Carol, a thin, sharp-jawed woman who smiled at you with her teeth, but not her eyes. Greg had the particular skill of men who feel entitled without quite articulating why. He made his disappointment felt without ever naming it. After Tom died, Greg had made certain overtures about Tom's life insurance policy, a modest $80,000 payout, suggesting, without quite saying, that families should share in family money. I had declined politely. He had never quite forgiven me for that. In the 2 weeks before that Tuesday in March, I had noticed Greg's truck parked near my neighborhood twice. Once on a Thursday evening, idling at the corner of Elm Crest and Maple, engine running, going nowhere. Once on a Saturday morning, as I was pulling out of my driveway, I caught the black F150 in my rearview mirror, a block behind me, before it turned off. I told myself it was coincidence. Greg lived 20 minutes away. People drove through neighborhoods all the time. But something in the back of my mind filed it away, the way you file small, cold things you don't want to look at directly. It was that same Saturday I bought the ticket. I had finished my shopping, a cart of necessities, nothing extravagant, and I was heading to my lane to pay when I stopped. Near the front registers, by the lottery display, a single scratch-off ticket was left on the rack. A $1 Ohio jackpot ticket, the kind teenagers buy as a joke and toss without checking. I hadn't bought a lottery ticket in probably 6 years, not since Tom and I used to get them together on New Year's Eve, laughing about what we'd do with the money. We always agreed, a house with a porch, somewhere near water. The cashier, a 17-year-old named Justin with braces and a Cleveland Cavaliers jersey, noticed me hesitating. "Last one," he said, with the bored shrug of someone for whom nothing is particularly interesting. I took it. I paid for my groceries and the ticket. Total, $47.23. I tucked the ticket into the small zipper pocket of my purse, alongside my chapstick and my CVS rewards card, and I didn't think about it again until Sunday night. Emma had just hung up. It was 9:15. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and the week's small debris. Receipts, a grocery circular, the lottery ticket. I found a quarter in the junk drawer and scratched the ticket over the sink. I looked at the numbers. I set the ticket down. I picked it up again. I went to my laptop and opened the Ohio Lottery website. I typed in the numbers. My fingers were clumsy. I made 2 typos and had to start over. Then I hit enter. The screen confirmed what I had already seen with my own eyes. $33 million. $33 million. I sat back down at the kitchen table. My tea had gone cold. I sat there for a very long time in the yellow kitchen light, just breathing, trying to understand what had happened in my life in the space of one ordinary Saturday. I didn't sleep that night. I wrapped the ticket in a Ziploc bag. I put the bag inside an envelope. I put the envelope inside my copy of the King James Bible, the hardcover one on the nightstand, the one Tom had given me for our 20th anniversary, and I placed the Bible back in the drawer. Then I lay in the dark with my heart hammering and thought about what to do next. By morning, I knew. I would drive to the Ohio Lottery Commission regional office in Columbus. I would claim my prize. I would start a new life. I ironed a blouse. I put on lipstick. I drove 2.5 hours with the Bible on the passenger seat. The Ohio Lottery Commission office was a beige building in a business park off I-71. I waited 40 minutes in a plastic chair before a man in a gray suit came out and introduced himself as Walter Pierce, the claims manager. He was heavy-set, with reading glasses perched on his forehead, and he carried himself with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to delivering both very good and very bad news in the same afternoon. He took the ticket. He examined it. He looked at his computer screen. He looked back at me. And then Walter Pierce said 3 words that collapsed my world. Someone already claimed. I must have stared at him for a full 5 seconds without speaking. The fluorescent lights in that beige office hummed steadily. Somewhere behind a partition, a phone rang twice and went unanswered. Walter Pierce looked back at me with a careful, neutral expression. The face of a man trained not to betray anything before the lawyers got involved. "I'm sorry," I said. The words came out thin and strange, like they belonged to someone else entirely. "This ticket number has already had a claim filed against it," he said. He folded his hands on the desk with a kind of rehearsed steadiness. "The claim was submitted to our office 48 hours ago. I'm unable to release funds or process competing claims without a formal legal review. You would need to provide documentation of purchase and consult with an attorney before we can proceed." I felt the blood drain from my face. Who filed the claim? He shook his head. "I'm not able to disclose that information at this stage. It's part of our claims confidentiality protocol." I sat there in that plastic chair, the same kind they have in DMV offices and hospital waiting rooms, and I tried to understand what was happening. Someone had claimed my ticket, a ticket I had purchased at Kroger at 10:43 a.m. on a Saturday morning, a ticket that had spent 3 nights inside my Bible, in my nightstand drawer, untouched. And then, like a door opening onto something cold, I knew. I drove home in a state of controlled shock. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. My eyes stayed on the road. But inside, something was shifting. The way the earth shifts after a tremor, when the ground has stopped moving, but the buildings haven't decided yet what to do. Greg. It had to be Greg. The truck idling at the corner, the Saturday morning tail, The calls in recent weeks with their soft, probing questions. How are you managing, Diane? Are you still at Kroger? You ever think about selling the house? Questions that felt like fingers testing a lock. He must have known. Or he had made his move before he was certain, betting that I would fold the way I always had, quietly, without a fight. The way a woman who clips coupons and drives a cracked mirror Civic is expected to fold. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes after I got home. I didn't go inside. The engine off, the mid-March cold beginning to creep in through the windows, and I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in 5 years. I calculated what I had lost, not just the money, though $33 million is a figure that restructures the entire architecture of a life. I thought about the winter nights I had cried over heating bills. I thought about the Christmas I had told Emma I couldn't come to Columbus because I couldn't afford the gas and the hotel, and she had driven to me instead, without a word of complaint, because she was her father's daughter. I thought about my knees, which ached now after 8-hour shifts standing on the store floor. I thought about the cracked mirror I kept meaning to fix, and never did, because there was always something else. I thought about Portugal, a travel documentary Tom and I had watched together in 2014, a Saturday evening, the way we spent so many Saturday evenings. Together, imagining a life slightly larger than the one we had. I thought about Tom, about a man who had worked himself into an early grave and left me with an $80,000 insurance policy and a house that needed a new roof, and about his brother who had sat across from me at the funeral reception and thought, what can I take? And then I did something that surprised me. I stopped crying. Not because the grief wasn't real, but because grief requires stillness, and I was no longer willing to be still. Something had ignited in me that was harder and cleaner than sorrow. It was fury. It was purpose. It was the particular kind of clarity that arrives when you have spent 5 years managing and economizing and surviving, and then someone reaches into your life and tries to take the one impossible thing. Greg Mitchell was not going to take this from me. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had scratched that ticket, where I had eaten 10,000 quiet meals alone, and I opened my laptop. I needed 3 things. I needed a lawyer. I needed to preserve the evidence, and I needed to understand exactly what Greg had filed and how. The first thing I did was email Emma, not to tell her everything. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, and I didn't want to frighten her before I knew more, but to ask whether she knew a good attorney in the Columbus area. I framed it as a general question about estate planning matters. Emma didn't overanalyze. She was practical like her father. She sent me 2 names within the hour. A woman named Patricia Wells, who had handled a civil dispute for a friend's father, and a firm called Harding and Associates, specializing in civil litigation. I wrote both names on a legal pad with a ballpoint pen. Then I called Kroger. I asked to speak with Debbie Oxner, the store manager who had worked there longer than I had and knew me by my first name. I told her I had a question about a purchase I'd made the previous Saturday morning. I asked whether the store's security cameras covered the lottery display near the front registers. There was a pause. "They do," Debbie said slowly. "Is something wrong, Diane?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Can you tell me how long footage is kept before it's recorded over?" 30 days, she said. "Corporate policy." I looked at the date on my laptop screen. 17 days since I had bought that ticket. 13 days remaining before the footage disappeared forever. "Debbie," I said, "I need you to do me a favor. I need you to make sure that footage doesn't get deleted. The Saturday morning of March 4th, around 10:40 a.m., near the lottery display." Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear Debbie thinking. "Diane," she said carefully, "what is going on?" I took a breath. "Someone is trying to steal something from me," I said, "and I'm not going to let them." The attorney's name was Patricia Wells, and she had an office on the 4th floor of a glass building in downtown Columbus that smelled of coffee and leather-bound books. She was 53, with short silver hair cut close to her head and a handshake that communicated exactly what she intended it to communicate. She did not waste time. I had the impression she had never wasted a minute of her life and found people who did mildly offensive. I drove to Columbus on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after my visit to the Lottery Commission. I brought everything: the original ticket sealed in its Ziploc bag, a printed screenshot of the lottery website confirmation I had taken Sunday night, my Kroger receipt showing the $47.23 transaction, and a photograph I had impulsively taken on my way out of the store that morning, the lottery display rack with a clear gap where the last ticket had been. Something had told me to take the photo. I didn't analyze why. I just did it. Patricia examined each item with the unhurried focus of someone who has learned that small details are where cases are won and lost. "You have good instincts," she said. "I work a register," I said. "I know what missing documentation costs you." She almost smiled. She explained the process with the kind of clarity that costs a lot per hour and is worth every penny. The Ohio Lottery Commission, by law, could not release jackpot funds when 2 competing claims existed for the same physical ticket. Both claims would be investigated by the Commission's legal division. The burden of proof rested on demonstrating legitimate ownership and purchase. The physical ticket, ideally corroborated by purchase evidence. The first person to file held no automatic advantage. What mattered was the strength of the evidence. What could they claim? I asked. What argument could they legally construct? Patricia set down her pen. Several things. Co-ownership. That the ticket was purchased jointly. A gift. That you gave it to them. Theft. That the ticket was originally theirs and you took it, which would temporarily shift the burden. Or they could simply fabricate documentation and hope their paperwork is more convincing than yours. She paused. Based on what you've described, I'd expect a combination of the first and the last. They'll lie, I said. Most do, she said. It wasn't cynicism, it was experience, which is a different thing. The next steps: formally notify the Commission of our counterclaim, request disclosure of the opposing documentation, and file for a temporary injunction preventing any payment while the dispute was pending. Simultaneously, we would pursue the Kroger security footage as our primary corroborating evidence. I left her office 2 hours later with a retainer agreement in my bag and something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It felt like hope, and it felt dangerous. Because hope, when you've been without it, is almost painful. 2 days later, Greg called. He didn't lead with anything accusatory. That was never his style. Greg operated the way water does, finding the smallest crack and applying steady, patient pressure. He called on a Friday evening while I was eating dinner, and he opened with pleasantries. How was I doing? Had I heard from Emma lately? He'd been meaning to reach out since Christmas. His voice was warm and unhurried, a man with nothing urgent on his mind. I answered in monosyllables. Fine, good, sure. Then he said, Listen, Diane, I heard something. A friend mentioned you might be looking into legal matters. Is everything okay with the house? The mortgage? My fork stopped moving. Someone had talked. Was it possible the Commission had flagged the counterclaim filing in a way that became accessible? Or had Greg simply been doing what I should have assumed he was doing, watching, listening, tracking any ripple I made? He had been watching my house for weeks. Why would he stop watching everything else? "Everything's fine, Greg," I said. "Just some routine paperwork." "Because if you ever need anything," he said, in that warm, oily register that had always set my teeth on edge, "Carol and I are always here. Family takes care of family." "I know," I said. "Thank you." After I hung up, I sat very still for a moment. Then I called Patricia. "He knows I'm moving," I said. "Of course he does," she said calmly. "He's monitoring you, which means he's nervous." A pause. Nervous people make mistakes. Let him be nervous. The security footage came on a Friday afternoon. Debbie Oxner had flagged the segment personally and shepherded it through the store's IT department with the protective tenacity of a woman who had managed a grocery operation for 20 years and understood what it meant to hold something carefully. Patricia's office received a certified digital copy within the week, and I drove to Columbus that Friday to watch it with her in the conference room. There I was, Saturday, March 4th, 10:43:17 a.m. camera angle, full view of register area and lottery display. A woman in a gray fleece jacket and dark jeans standing at the rack. One hand reaching out, taking the single remaining ticket from the display, walking to register 6, paying, time-stamped, clear, unambiguous, my face, my jacket, the same gray fleece hanging in my closet right now, the Kroger receipt, which matched the timestamp to the second. I watched the 11-second clip twice. Neither time did I feel anything particularly dramatic. It was simply the truth, and there it was, recorded, preserved, irrefutable. The truth doesn't always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it arrives as 11 seconds of security footage in a business park conference room with the afternoon light coming in at a low angle through the blinds. "Is this enough?" I asked. Patricia Wells leaned back in her chair. She allowed herself, for the first time since we had met, a real and unguarded smile. "It's a very strong beginning," she said. Patricia filed the counterclaim and the injunction on a Monday morning. By Tuesday evening, Greg knew. I don't know the exact mechanism, whether someone at the commission notified him or whether he had anticipated our move and positioned himself accordingly. What I know is that he called at 7:48 p.m. on a Tuesday, and this time there were no pleasantries at all. "What the hell are you doing, Diane?" His voice had dropped into a register I had heard before, at Tom's funeral, when he had argued with Tom's cousin over the burial arrangements, and once 3 years ago, when I had told him no about the insurance money. It was the voice of a man accustomed to getting his way eventually, recalibrating for a longer fight. "I'm exercising my legal rights, Greg," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced being steady. "You're making a very serious mistake." He paused, letting that breathe. That ticket had Tom's name all over it. Tom and I played the lottery together for years. You know that. "Tom talked about a lot of things," I said. "But Tom is gone, and I bought that ticket alone with my own money on a Saturday morning, and I have the receipt and the security footage to prove it." Silence. Long enough that I could hear him recalibrating. "Security footage," he repeated. His voice had gone colder. "Yes," I said. Another silence. Then, "I don't think you understand what you're getting into. You want to drag this family through courts? Through the news? You want Emma reading about all of this?" A pause. "Because I can make this very messy, Diane. There are things about how Tom handled money, about the insurance, that some people might find interesting. I haven't said anything publicly. I'm trying to protect you. But if you push this..." There it was, the threat, carefully constructed, never quite stating the thing directly, deniable at every point. My hand tightened on the phone. but I kept my voice absolutely level. "Greg," I said, "Tom's insurance was paid out legally and properly. There is nothing to expose. But I want you to understand something. If you contact me again outside of formal legal channels, I will report this conversation to my attorney and to the police as an attempt at intimidation. Are we clear?" He hung up. I set the phone on the table. My hand was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the immense effort it had taken to hold myself together for the duration of that call. I sat until my hands stilled. Then I called Patricia and repeated every word. She was quiet for a moment. "He just handed us a harassment complaint," she said. "Record everything from this point forward. Every call, every message, every sighting of his vehicle." The next morning, Carol came to my door. She had dressed carefully. A good coat, hair done, a casserole dish covered in foil carried at the level of a peace offering, the universal symbol of women managing conflict through domesticity. She smiled with her teeth when I opened the door. "Greg told me you two had words," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. You know how he gets. Can I come in for a minute?" I looked at the casserole. I looked at her eyes, which were doing a careful thing, gauging my posture, assessing whether I was going to crack. I had watched Carol Mitchell for 23 years. I knew the difference between her warmth and her strategy. What was standing on my porch was strategy. "No," I said. "Thank you for the food, Carol, but this isn't a good time." Something moved across her face, just a fraction of a second. A flash of something hot and frustrated, quickly contained. "Diane," she said, her voice dropping to something intimate and persuasive. "Couldn't we just talk? Woman to woman? Without the lawyers? All Greg wants is to feel like Tom's family isn't being forgotten. Is that so unreasonable?" "Everything goes through my attorney," I said. "You have her contact information." Carol stood there another moment with the casserole dish. Then she set it down on the porch next to the doormat, placed it there without a word, a gesture that managed to be both gracious and faintly threatening, and walked back to her car. I watched her go. Then I went inside, called Patricia, and documented the visit. "Don't open the door again unless you know exactly who it is," Patricia said. That weekend, I drove to Columbus and spent 2 nights at Emma's apartment. I had told Emma there was a legal matter involving some money from Tom, vague enough to be technically accurate, and she hadn't pressed. She made pasta. We watched 2 old movies on her couch. Marcus, her boyfriend, was quiet and kind and gave me the guest room without making anything of it. I slept in clean sheets that smelled of lavender detergent, and I slept better than I had in weeks. I needed those 2 days, not because I was weak. Strength has to come from somewhere. You don't draw it from nothing. You build it the same way you build anything, slowly, with materials, from the ground up. I was building. The offer came through their attorney on a Thursday morning. Patricia called me on my lunch break. I was in the Kroger break room with a sandwich I wasn't eating, and she read me the terms of what Greg and Carol's lawyer, a man named Dennis Falco, was calling a negotiated settlement proposal. The language was careful and formal. They were prepared to withdraw their competing claim in exchange for 40% of the jackpot, paid as a lump sum after taxes in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement. I did the math quietly. After the lump sum option and federal and Ohio state taxes, $33 million netted approximately $17 million. 40% of that was roughly $6.8 million, going to Gregory and Carol Mitchell for doing nothing except lying, filing fraudulent documents, coming to my door with a casserole, and threatening me in my own living room. "No," I said. Patricia paused. "Just like that?" "Just like that." A brief silence. Then something that might have been a quiet breath of satisfaction on her end. "All right, I'll draft the rejection and transmit it today." I put my phone away and finished my sandwich. Then I went back to the register and scanned groceries for 4 more hours. Cereal, milk, frozen dinners, all the ordinary architecture of other people's lives. And the whole time I felt a strange, cold clarity, like the air after a storm has passed and the sky has gone very blue and very still. What did Greg think he knew about me, really? He thought he knew a woman who had spent 5 years shrinking herself to fit a smaller life. A woman who startled at confrontation, who apologized when bumped into, who always did the easier thing because the easier thing was all she had ever been able to afford. A woman, in short, who could be managed. He had known that woman once. She had changed without his noticing. In the weeks following the rejected settlement, things went quiet in a way that was more unsettling than the confrontations. Greg stopped calling. Carol did not reappear. Their attorney requested a 2-week extension on submitting their evidence documentation. A standard delaying tactic, Patricia told me, deployed when a party is struggling to build a narrative that fits the facts they can actually produce. "They're stalling," she said during one of our check-in calls. "Their paperwork is weak. They know the footage is a problem for them." "So what do? "We wait," she said, "and we let them panic." Waiting has never been easy for me. Tom used to say I had the patience of a person running 3 lives simultaneously and falling behind in all of them. But this was a different kind of waiting, not passive, not fearful. It was the waiting of someone who knows what they're waiting for. And what I was waiting for was the truth to do its slow, inevitable work. It was during this period that I told Emma everything. She came down to Lakewood for a weekend in April. I had asked her, and she came without hesitation, the way she always did. We sat at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with coffee going cold in our mugs, and I told her. The ticket. The office. Walter Pierce and his 3 words. Greg and Carol. The lawyer. The footage. The forged, or at least suspicious, documentation. All of it. Emma listened without interrupting. She had inherited that quality from Tom, the ability to hear something fully before she responded. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. Then she looked up. "You bought the ticket, Mom," she said. "I have watched you clip coupons every week for 10 years. You earned this." That made me cry in a way I hadn't cried since the funeral. Not from grief, but from the overwhelming, exhausting relief of being believed without qualification, of having someone look at the truth I was carrying and simply say, yes. Emma stayed 4 days. She helped me organize the document files by date and category. She spent one evening on her phone, reading relevant Ohio lottery fraud statutes aloud to me while I made dinner, occasionally highlighting a phrase and saying, "That's important. Write that down." She approached the whole thing with the calm, practical intelligence she had always had, and which I was only beginning to recognize as the most valuable thing I had ever given her. The model of a person who does not stop. On her last evening, I also told Linda Pruitt. Linda was my neighbor of 12 years, a retired school teacher who kept a meticulous garden and an equally meticulous eye on the street. She was 68, plain-spoken, and constitutionally immune to gossip. She found small talk tedious and had always been honest with me in a way that most people aren't, which I had sometimes found uncomfortable and now found invaluable. I told her over her back fence as the April sun went down orange behind the houses. She listened. She nodded once, slowly, the way teachers nod when a student has explained a problem correctly. Then she said, "I saw Greg Mitchell's truck on this street 4 times in 2 weeks. I wrote down the plate number both times because the vehicle had no business being here that long." She paused. "Do you want the dates and times?" I stared at her. "Linda," I said, "yes, I very much want the dates and times." She went inside and came back 2 minutes later with a small spiral-bound notebook, the kind teachers use for attendance records, and read me 4 separate entries in her small, precise handwriting. Dates, approximate times, her own notes, vehicle stationary for approximately 25 minutes, engine running. I called Patricia that same evening. "I have a witness," I said, "with a written log." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Diane," she said finally, "do you understand what that means legally?" "Tell me," I said. "It means we can establish premeditation. Greg didn't file that claim impulsively. He had been observing your property, tracking your schedule, determining your patterns of movement in advance of the purchase. That transforms the fraud charge from opportunistic to deliberate." A pause. "It changes everything about how a court or a panel reads his intent." I looked out the kitchen window at the dark, quiet street, the same street Greg had parked on 4 times, watching, calculating. Waiting for me to make a purchase that he planned to steal. "Good," I said. They came on a Sunday evening in early May. I was in the living room reading when headlights swept across the front window. I looked through the curtain and saw Greg's black F150 at the curb. Both doors opened. Greg first in a button-down shirt, then Carol in a pale blue dress, carrying what appeared to be a bottle of wine. I stood behind the curtain for a moment. Then I texted Patricia. "They're here. Unannounced. Should I let them in?" Her response came in under a minute. "Your choice. If you do, record everything. Voice memo. Phone in your pocket." I opened voice memos, pressed record, and slid the phone into the pocket of my cardigan. Then I went to the door. Greg stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets and a carefully composed expression, almost sheepish, designed to register as humble. It was an expression I had seen before, and I knew exactly what it cost him to wear it. "Diane," he said, "I know we should have called first, but Carol and I felt like we needed to come in person. Is that okay?" I stepped back from the door. I let them in. We settled in the living room, Greg and Carol on the sofa, me in Tom's old armchair. The wine bottle sat on the coffee table between us, unopened. Carol looked around the room with quick, measuring eyes. Greg spoke first. "I owe you an apology," he said, with the gravity of a man who has rehearsed sincerity. "The way I handled this, I wasn't being fair to you. I got defensive. I said things on the phone I shouldn't have said. Carol and I talked a lot about it this week, and we both agree. You've been through enough. You lost Tom. You've been carrying everything alone. The last thing either of us wants is to add to that." He paused. The pause was calculated. Give the apology room to settle. Let it do its work. "We're withdrawing the claim," he said. I looked at him without speaking. "But," he continued, and there was the word that had been waiting, just out of sight, behind all the sincerity, "we do want to ask one thing, not legally, not through attorneys, just as family." He leaned forward slightly. "Diane, Tom would have wanted us to still be in each other's lives. He would have wanted you to share something like this with the people who loved him. You know that better than anyone. We're not asking for a number. We're not asking for 40%. We're just asking you to think about what family means, to be generous, the way Tom would have been." Carol leaned forward and placed her hand over mine on the arm of the chair. Her fingers were cool and dry. "You were always so strong, Diane," she said softly. "Tom said that about you constantly. He was so proud of you. We just don't want this to end with lawyers and courtrooms and the family broken apart. Tom wouldn't want that. You know he wouldn't." I looked at Carol's hand on mine for a moment. I thought about Tom. Not the Tom they were carefully constructing for me, the soft-edged, endlessly forgiving Tom who would have wanted everyone to get along, but the actual Tom. The Tom who had worked 12-hour days without complaint, who had known exactly what a dollar was worth because he had earned every one of them, who had looked Greg in the eye at his own kitchen table 3 years before his death and quietly declined to lend him money for a business scheme that everyone but Greg could see would fail, that Tom would not have been fooled for a second. "Tom would have wanted me treated fairly," I said. "Of course," Carol said quickly. "And what you're describing," I said, "isn't fairness. You filed a fraudulent claim against a ticket you knew wasn't yours. You came to my door with food and tried to walk into my home. You called me in the evening and implied things about Tom's insurance. You sat in my living room and invoked my husband's memory to ask me to give you money for a theft." I paused and looked at them both, one after the other. "I want you to hear me very clearly. I am not going to do that." Something crossed Greg's face. Not dramatically. Greg was controlled. But behind his eyes, something went flat and cold, the way a room goes cold when a window is opened in winter. "Diane," he said quietly and precisely, "think carefully about what you're doing. We know people in this community. We know people who knew Tom. If this goes to a full hearing, if everything comes out publicly, it won't just be us who looks bad. These situations get complicated. People take sides. Is that really what you want for your life here?" "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a reality," he said. "Then I'll see you at the hearing," I said. I stood up. "I think you should go now." Carol's composed expression slipped, only for a moment, a fraction of a second, but I saw it, something hot and ugly surfacing before she pulled it back behind the smile. Greg stood slowly, straightening his shirt, and looked around my living room one final time with the expression of a man quietly calculating losses. They left. I heard the truck doors close, the engine, the sound of the F-150 pulling away from the curb in the dark. I went to the window and watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I sat back down in Tom's armchair, and I let myself be afraid. I didn't fight it. Fear is information. It tells you what is real, what is at stake, how much you have to lose. What matters is not that the fear exists, but what you do while it's there. And underneath the fear, I found something that had no patience anymore for people who thought they could take what wasn't theirs and dress it up as family feeling. I stopped the voice memo. I sent the recording to Patricia. Then I made tea, and I planned. The formal hearing before the Ohio Lottery Commission dispute panel was scheduled for the 3rd week of May. Patricia called it a document fortress, which was her precise professional way of saying she had built something that did not have gaps. Over the preceding weeks, she had assembled the original physical ticket in its Ziploc bag, the time-stamped Kroger security footage on certified digital media, the matching Kroger receipt, my debit card bank statement showing the $47.23 transaction at the exact time of the footage, Linda Pruitt's written surveillance log with dates and times, the voice memo from my living room in which Greg implied that public attention to the legal proceedings would reflect badly on me, a statement Patricia characterized to the commission in precise legal language as witness intimidation, and a written statement from Justin, the 17-year-old Kroger cashier, confirming that he had sold the final lottery ticket from the display to a woman in a gray fleece jacket on the morning of March 4th. Greg and Carol, through Dennis Falco, had submitted a handwritten note purportedly from Tom expressing his wish to share in any future lottery luck with his brother, a receipt from a different Kroger location, not the store where I shopped, dated the same Saturday, and a narrative statement about Greg and Tom's long-standing tradition of playing the lottery together as brothers. The hearing was held in a 7th-floor conference room in a government building in Columbus. The panel, Eleanor Park, a retired judge serving as chairperson, Carl Dines, a legal analyst, and Renata Walsh, a commission compliance officer. Across the table sat Falco, Greg, and Carol, Greg in a dark suit, Carol in a black blazer, both composed. I wore a navy dress and flat shoes. I sat straight. I kept my hands folded on the table. Eleanor Park opened with the procedural framework. Both parties would present evidence. The panel would issue a ruling within 10 business days. She spoke in the even, measured cadence of someone who has presided over disputes for decades and long since stopped being surprised by human behavior. Falco presented first, and he was good. He spoke warmly and carefully about Tom and Greg's brotherhood. He framed Greg as a man honoring a family tradition that predated my marriage to Tom. He presented the handwritten note with the gravity of a man who has been coached to treat it as sacred. He referenced the alternate Kroger receipt. He spoke briefly but pointedly about the difficulty of a woman managing her affairs alone after a significant loss, a delicate implication that my judgment might be compromised by grief. It was a reasonable performance. I watched Greg while Falco spoke. Greg was performing calm. His jaw was relaxed. His hands were still on the table. Then Patricia presented our case. She began with the footage. A laptop was placed at the center of the table. The panel leaned in. 11 seconds. A woman in a gray fleece jacket taking the last ticket from the rack. Timestamp. 10:43:17 a.m. Clear, unobstructed, incontrovertible. Patricia placed the Kroger receipt beside it. She placed the debit card statement beside that. Same amount, same timestamp, to the second. She let the 3 items sit there together and said nothing for a moment, the way a person says nothing when the evidence is speaking clearly enough. Then she produced Linda Pruitt's notebook. She read the entries aloud, each one, with the dates and times. 4 separate occasions. A vehicle registered to Gregory Raymond Mitchell, stationary on the street outside my residence, in the 2 weeks preceding the ticket purchase. She placed a copy of Greg's DMV registration record beside the notebook. She did not editorialize. She simply let the sequence be visible. She produced the voice memo. The conference room was very quiet as Greg's voice came through the laptop speaker. If everything comes out publicly, it won't just be us who looks bad. Eleanor Park made a note. Carl Dines made a note. Renata Walsh looked at Greg for a moment before returning her eyes to her pad. Then Patricia addressed the handwritten note. The document submitted by the opposing party, she said, purports to bear Tom Mitchell's signature, expressing his wish to share lottery winnings with his brother. We commissioned a handwriting analysis from a forensic document examiner, whose report is included in your evidentiary packets. She gave each panel member a moment to find the document. The analysis concludes, at a confidence level of 91%, that the signature on this note is inconsistent with authenticated samples of Tom Mitchell's handwriting, drawn from his will, his 2017 federal tax return, and his mortgage renewal agreement. The room was entirely silent. I looked at Greg. For the first time in 23 years of knowing this man, through every careful, patient maneuver he had made, Greg Mitchell looked uncertain. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward Falco and said something, low and urgent. Falco held up a hand and spoke. "We would request a brief recess to review the handwriting analysis. The analysis was included in the evidence packet transmitted to your office 5 days ago," Patricia said pleasantly. "You have had ample time to prepare a response." Eleanor Park looked at Falco over her reading glasses. "Do you have a substantive response to the handwriting analysis, counselor?" A silence. "We're prepared to address the provenance of the document." "That is not what I asked," Eleanor Park said. Another silence. Longer. I watched Carol turn her head toward Greg. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could see, in the set of her mouth, in the way her eyes had gone bright and hard, that the composure she had maintained for weeks had begun, finally, to crack. And I could see Greg do something I had never seen him do in 23 years. He looked away. I sat in my navy dress with my hands folded on the table, and I felt something I can only describe as stillness, not triumph. That would come later, and it would be quieter than I expected. In that moment, there was only the clean, certain knowledge that the truth was in the room with us, and the truth did not need me to be afraid anymore. The panel issued its ruling 9 days later. Patricia called me at the Kroger break room on a Thursday afternoon. I was eating a banana I didn't want and pretending to read a magazine. I knew from the first syllable of her voice. "It's unanimous," she said. 3-0. Diane Mitchell is the lawful claimant of Ohio Lottery ticket number OH-4471-JK. The Commission is directed to process full jackpot payment and... A pause. The panel has referred the matter of the fraudulent competing claim to the Ohio Attorney General's office for potential criminal investigation. I sat down on the plastic break room chair. "Okay," I said. My voice was very small. "Diane, you won." "I know," I said. "I know." Margot from Produce came in, looked at me, and asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. She brought me a cup of water and left me alone, which was exactly right. The jackpot was $33 million. I chose the lump sum option, which, after federal and Ohio state taxes, delivered approximately $16.8 million. Patricia's legal fees totaled $47,000. I paid them with profound satisfaction. The particular satisfaction of paying a bill that was an investment in your own life. I also sent her a separate check for $10,000 with a handwritten note. "Thank you for believing in the math." "You did the hard part," she said. "We both did," I said. The Ohio Attorney General's office opened its criminal investigation within 2 weeks. The charges: filing a fraudulent claim against a state lottery prize, forgery of a deceased person's signature, and witness intimidation. Greg was arrested on a Tuesday morning in June. The local news ran a brief item with his name, his face, his truck visible in the background. I looked at it for a moment without pleasure. What I felt was the quiet settling of something long out of balance. Carol was arrested 2 days later and reportedly began cooperating with prosecutors. Their marriage, according to Tom's cousin Janet, was not surviving the process. I resigned from Kroger on a Friday afternoon. I gave Debbie Oxner 2 full weeks' notice, because that was the right thing to do. On my last day, the department threw a small party. A sheet cake, a card signed by 18 people, a $25 Applebee's gift card that made me laugh until I was crying. I hugged Margot from Produce. I shook Justin's hand. "I just told the truth," he said. "That's all it ever takes," I told him. "That's always enough." The house on Elm Crest Drive. I sold in August to a young couple with a toddler who loved the backyard. I stood in the kitchen one last time, the kitchen where I had scratched the ticket over the sink and changed the entire direction of my life, and said goodbye without grief. The cracked mirror on my Honda Civic I had replaced in April, $85 and a Saturday morning. I stood in the parking lot afterward and looked at my reflection in the new glass. Clean, whole, no cracks running through it. And I thought, yes, just that. Just yes. I moved to Vermilion, a small city on the shore of Lake Erie, where the houses have front porches and the light off the water turns everything the color of warm copper. I bought a 3-bedroom house with a porch swing, half a mile from the lake, paid cash, signed the papers, and walked out into the October air and just breathed. The first morning I woke up there, I listened to the lake. Distant, steady, enormous. Not Tom's absence, not budget calculations, just water and birds, and a life that was, finally, simply mine. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week, teaching financial literacy to adults returning to the workforce. I knew what it felt like to count grocery money at the checkout. You cannot fake having lived something. Emma came in September with Marcus. We had dinner on the porch watching the lake go from silver to gold, and she held my hand and said nothing, which said everything. In October, I flew to Portugal alone, the trip Tom and I had imagined together in 2014. I walked through Lisbon's tiled neighborhoods, sat above the Tagus River, and thought about him. I was sad and glad at the same time, and both things were true. When I came back, I established the Thomas Mitchell Memorial Scholarship at a Cleveland community college, $5,000 a year for adult students who had taken the longer road. Greg pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery, probation, a fine, community service. His business collapsed. By Christmas, he was doing landscaping in Akron. Carol moved back to her mother's house in Youngstown, which she had left 30 years earlier with considerable ambition. I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. I felt scales finding their balance. What I felt triumphant about was simpler. Mornings on my porch, Emma's Sunday calls, a house with no mortgage and no cracked mirror. The knowledge that the woman who clipped coupons and survived 5 quiet years alone was the same woman who filed the paperwork and refused to stop. Those 2 women were always the same woman. I just had to remember it. What would you have done? Thank you truly for reading this story to the end. If it stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it.